everyone. We're glad to welcome you to the third and last session of our John D. Lee family reunion this morning. And got some great messages to hear today, as well as some wonderful musical numbers. And we'd like to begin this morning with an opening prayer. It'll be offered by Judge Robert Owens, the judge that I cut my teeth on as a new lawyer here in St. George. He was a great judge and is married to Cheer Henry Owens, who's a descendant of, I can't remember. Agatha.
Oh, Agatha. Oh, I'm sorry. Agatha.
Is that right? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, Agatha Ann. So we'll hear the opening prayer from Judge Owens, and then we have a great opportunity to hear from two members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir who will sing our opening song for us this morning. And The Impossible Dream. And that is Kevin and Denise Brown. We're grateful to have them with us today, and it's so neat to have members of the Tabernacle Choir that are in our family. And we heard yesterday we have a member of the orchestra at Temple Square in our family too. We heard from her yesterday, so that's so neat to have these talented people in our family. So we'll have the opening prayer first, and then we'll hear a musical number from Brother and Sister Brown.
Our Father in heaven, we are met this beautiful morning in the final session of the Lee family reunion, and we thank Thee for the opportunity that we have to thus assemble and share our knowledge and share our feelings about our family by blood and by those who have married into it here on this occasion. We are grateful for this ancestor and the many blessings that we have received from being members of this family, among which are the need to think more deeply about our roots and our sources and our responsibilities and the blessings that we have received through our families. We pray that we might always be diligent and play our part in turning our hearts and those of others in the family to our ancestors, and that we will go forth from this reunion today vowing for greater participation and bringing more blessings into the lives of others from it. And we thank Thee for all these blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
To be willing to march into hell.
beautiful way to open the session this morning. Thank you so much, Brother and Sister Brown, for that musical number. We have three great speakers in this morning's session, and anxious to hear from all of them. Our first speaker this morning will be Vern Lee, and we all know how much he's done for our family. And he's a modest person as I've gotten to know him in his character, but he has done so much for us in terms of reconciliation with all of the other families that are involved in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And I just think he's been such a leader in our family that it wouldn't be a family reunion if we didn't hear from Vern. And so we're glad to hear from him this morning first. And following Vern, we'll hear from Brother Jared Smith. Jared practices law in Arizona, and I found out in talking to him just yesterday that we attended law school about the same time. We finished a year before I started, I think, at the same law school, and we didn't even know that until yesterday. But he's done a lot for our family too, and I think he's one of the people that was chosen to peer review the new book that's come out about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, so we're glad to hear from him. And he's also representing Renee Durfee, I think, today, who is one of the vice presidents in the family organization and has done a lot with the genealogy of John Dealey, so we're glad to hear from him. And then finally, we'll be pleased to hear from our president, Newell K. Richardson. And I just got to know Newell this year as I've been working with him and preparing for the reunion, and I'm so impressed with him. He has a great personality and great leadership skills, and I think has done a great job of bringing us all together in planning this reunion, and I appreciate him so much. And he'll be the concluding speaker today. And we'll hear again from the Browns after he speaks. They'll give our closing musical number also. And then I forgot to ask somebody to give a closing prayer, and there's one person in the audience who I can probably count on to do that without asking her. She is the wife of my first counselor when I served as bishop in our ward, and so I know I can count on her without asking her. Sister Cheryl Henry, who is a dear friend of mine, so we'll call on her to give the closing prayer. Brother Vern.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you and share the wonderful atmosphere created here in St. George, particularly the weather. And I kind of enjoy it because it's so good to get out of it when you can. Newell K. has, I want to tell you something about Newell K. We lived in the same place in Arizona for a few years, and Newell K. and I became very close, and we shared a lot of good times. The place we lived in was out east of, or south of Safford, and it was a rural area of mesquite trees and cactus, and there were farms out there. But Newell and I became good friends and shared a lot of experiences together, and I recall those often, and it's with great satisfaction that I have those recollections of that period, and he was part of that. We were on missions at the same time. He was back in the Eastern States Mission, and I was in the Northwestern States Mission. So we were a continent apart, but we corresponded with one another occasionally. And one day, my mission president called me and said, "You're getting a new companion." And so when I received the new companion, his last name was Richardson. And I said, "Well, I have a cousin named Richardson." And he said, "What's his name?" I said, "Newell Kay." And he said, "He's my cousin too." Things like that are always happening to me. And so we had a wonderful time serving in that mission with Richardsons. After my companion was moved from where I was, he was moved over in Montana, and I was in Washington. We corresponded between the three of us and had a good time and shared experiences. It was a wonderful relationship with those two men. I'll always remember them. I'm not supposed to talk about that this morning, but I'd like to talk about the early journals of John D. Lee. We're all familiar with the later journals because Juanita Brooks did such a good job in presenting those. But we seldom hear of the earlier journals from 1838, when John D. Lee joined the church, until 1847, when the Saints moved west. I spent the last 20 years collecting those journals and found them in a number of different places. I was always on the lookout for them, and if I could get a lead, I would go and try to locate that particular work, or whatever you want to call it. I think now that I've collected 10 journals of John D. Lee from the period 1840 to 1847. Whether there's more out there, I don't know. But I have every year covered, but doesn't mean there aren't some more that during one of those periods. These early journals that I've collected are in the process right now of being printed. They're at BYU, and who would you believe my partner was in this project but Ronald Walker of the book A Massacre at Mountain Meadows. Ron wrote most of the book, and the other two were people who did research and brought him the information. But Ron and I now are in the process of getting these John D. Lee early journals in print. John D. Lee joined the church in 1838, as you all know, and he didn't start keeping his journals until 1840, when the Saints had moved to just a minute, I've got it. Nauvoo. I have a slow mind these days. It's getting slower. But if I wait long enough, I know I can pop it up. But sometimes it takes a little time, as some of you might experience yourselves. But that's my lot. I'm now 80 years old and am experiencing all kinds of things that are wonderful. But I'm glad to be here with you folks this morning. The first missionary journal, the first journals he wrote were of a missionary kind. He was called on a mission in 1839, and he served 6 different missions. And the protocol for that period was that the person would go out for a mission, not for a certain period of time, but as much much as he felt he could spend. They were called for either a 2-year or 3-year mission, but they would perform maybe over a little more time than that. Maybe they'd go 3 months at one time, 6 months at another, maybe a year at another time, and finally fill that obligation. And that's what John D. Lee was doing in during these missions. So he went out in 1839 as a missionary. He didn't keep a record of that, but he wrote about it in Mormonism Unveiled and told all about that first mission that he made that he did not keep a record of. Then he went out again in 1840, 1842, and 43, and 1844. After his missionary period, he lived in Nauvoo. Actually, he moved to Nauvoo in 1840 and settled down, and he built homes there and raised a family. His last mission was to Kentucky. That's the year that 1844, the prophet was shot and killed, and he was on his mission during that period. He tells about it. In 1846, he went to Santa Fe, New Mexico on a mission to pick up the money that the Mormon battalion boys earned on their way to their appointed location. Then I have the Nauvoo mission, the Nauvoo records. It was John D. Lee at home. He worked in the temple, and he prepared for the Nauvoo Exodus during that period. And finally, I have the winter quarters records and the summer quarters records at the Missouri River when he was there waiting to go on to west to Utah. John Doyle Lee and his wife, Agatha Ann, became members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints a few years following its organization, as you all know. This was a major change in their lives, affecting both place and lifestyle for both of them. In aligning themselves with the LDS Church, they chose to leave their home in Vandalia, Illinois, to join the main body of the faith in the frontier wilderness of the state of Missouri. Lee wrote that at the time, he had a small fortune, a nice home, kind neighbors, and numerous friends. He was 26 years old when they moved from Vandalia to Nauvoo. His friends, we find, tried to dissuade him from taking such a radical step. Friends in Vandalia. Without success, he seemed firmly convinced that tales being told of incredible incidents with supernatural propensities in the life of Joseph Smith, the Mormon leader, were true. It wasn't long before John and his wife believed and accepted these stories to the extent that they seemed compelled to unite themselves with this controversial group. There could have been several circumstances influencing them in making such a commitment. It began with Lee's acquaintance with a Mormon missionary. He doesn't reveal a name, the first name, but only refers to him as Elder King. King portrayed himself as a traveling missionary from Indiana, making his way with his family to Missouri to join other Mormons living at Fort West. They had been on the road for several weeks when winter caught up with them. It was obvious to John that these people were in a bad way, for they appeared to have very little value with which to continue their journey to Missouri. Remember, John D. Lee was not a member of the church at this time. He says, I gave them provisions and invited them to stay at my place until the next spring. Both King and his wife were recent converts to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they gladly accepted the offer. Prior to this, he had been, as John described, a New Light Campbellite preacher. One Sunday, at the conclusion of the Sabbath day meeting, which had been conducted by local Methodists in the Lee home, John invited Elder King to address the congregation. With his background as a preacher, Elder King proved to be an able, provocative speaker, leaving Lee very impressed with the message that King seemed so effectively to have delivered. He observed that it was the first sermon he ever heard concerning Mormonism, despite the fact that in the previous year, 2 other Mormon missionaries had been in the neighborhood. Lee himself admitted that he was so steeped in his Catholic upbringing that he refused to listen to these 2 men. Both Agatha Ann and Abigail, her mother, attended the missionary services and were impressed enough that they tried to persuade John to accompany them to subsequent meetings, but he was not interested, he told them. However, when he heard Elder King speak of Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, and beliefs in biblical teachings, he questioned his feelings in the matter and he sought more information. He says, I quote, I was astonished to hear King prove his religion from the scriptures. I reflected and I determined to freely investigate his doctrines and do so with a prayerful heart. The more I studied the question, the more interested I became. Meanwhile, Levi Stewart, a close friend and neighbor of the Lee family, also became interested in what King was saying and decided to investigate firsthand the claims made by this supposed prophet Smith at his headquarters somewhere in Missouri. So Stewart subsequently became convinced of the veracity of what he heard and saw in Missouri, and while still there, affiliated himself with the group, and he was baptized. Lee reports that he returned to Vandalia with tales most cheering and thrilling. This is Stewart. And with accounts of the power and manifestations of the Holy Spirit working with that people, the power of healing the sick by the laying on of hands, prophesying, casting out devils and evil spirits, all of which he declared with words of soberness to be true. He also brought copies of the Book of Mormon with him, one of which he presented to his friend John Doyle Lee. John wrote later that Stewart's reported Missouri visit had great influence on him, expressing his own developing trust in the stories told about the Mormon prophet. Finally, his completion of reading the Book of Mormon evoked an ultimate expression of this faith. The catalyst seemed to be the sudden death of their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth Adeline. Not having fully recovered from the death of their first child 2 years previously, Elizabeth's passing was a devastating blow to both of the parents. It lent perhaps an expediency, or even a cause in itself, to initiate their removal from the site of these sad experiences. They sought a new life with the potential of renewed energy and a new faith and a new place. Through the night before Elizabeth's funeral, John sat with the body of his child, and while doing so read the Book of Mormon. He later wrote a brief statement about the night's experience, giving the reader a glimpse of the influence that the book might have on the future of his life. He said, I finished reading the Book of Mormon, and I believed it to be true. These events occurred over a period of a few months, but combined, they had a lifetime effect on the future of the John D. Lee and his family. They were reason enough for him to contemplate the move to the Mormon settlements on the Missouri frontier. His previous report of his visit to Missouri seemed especially inviting to John. That's Stuart's report. His descriptions of Latter-day Saint works and lifestyles seemed to coalesce all that which he had seen and heard about Smith and his followers into a measure of belief, lending substance to the stories of the prophet and fleshing out the skeletal discussions presented by Elder King. And of finally himself accepting the Book of Mormon, describing it as, quote, the star opening the dispensation of the fullness of times. The affiliation of John D. Lee and Agatha Ann with their new religious sect was solemnized when they were baptized in Missouri in 1838. Samuel H. Smith, a brother of the prophet, and Elder Daniel Cathcart, John says, preached. After the meeting, I and my wife were baptized by Elder Cathcart in Ambrosia on Sunny Grove Creek in Davies County, Missouri. Both Lee and Stuart, though new converts to the faith as they were, subsequently experienced many scenes of violence and horror in Missouri, which I'm sure all of you read about, epitomized by a mandate of the governor that the Mormons must leave the state or be exterminated. Surprisingly enough, those shortly after abandoning their home in Missouri and their arrival back in Illinois, John, whose testimony of his newly found religion seemed to be intact and untouched by these appalling experiences, he decided to follow the mandate which he believed was from the Lord through his prophet and go forth to preach the gospel, to serve a mission. The two-volume sets of Lee's later journals, 1848 to 1877, edited by Juanita Brooks and Robert Glass Cullen, were published almost 50 years ago. In the concluding paragraph of the introduction to the first edition, it is asserted that, quote, the 5 Lee diaries published in these 2 volumes constitute a chronicle of rare historical importance. They enable one to gain an understanding otherwise unobtainable of the activities, character, and psychology of one of the most arresting and polemic figures in Western history. That's our great-grandfather, John D. Lee. And so they do. Although publication of his earlier journals may not have the historical impact and appeal to the broad base of readers of the Chronicles evoke, those first diaries, they will be of equal, if not greater, interest to those his numberless posterity, as well as others not of the family who have an inherent fascination and curiosity about the man, his early beginnings and association with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The time and events covered in these early journals tell of formative experiences for John D. Lee. His society, the way he dealt with society, methods of presentation of himself and his beliefs, and were developing. His descriptions of the conversion to the LDS Church and subsequent membership and association with his new brethren and sisters in the faith revealed deep intellectual and spiritual beginnings for him, with attendant challenges typical of many of the early Mormon converts. Combined with the Missouri experience, his missionary years, and the later forced evacuation of the Mormons from Illinois, these early journals, which I'm speaking of, give us a perspective of his life and overall view of developing attitudes and beliefs as a younger John D. Lee than we're used to with the chronicles by the first writer. Later, he accepted and supported Smith's successor, Brigham Young, in the same role. His missionary journals from 1840 to 44 give the reader a pattern of missionary service which was perpetuated hundreds of times over in the lives of his brethren who joined the Latter-day Saint Church in the middle 19th century. A model, it seems, which many male converts followed, particularly in the Nauvoo era. They established homes and families while arranging their lifestyle to accommodate assignments within the framework of the merging society, facilitating dissemination of the Mormon doctrine throughout the United States and many nations abroad. Growth of Nauvoo in the early 1840s was remarkable, and John wrote about it in these early diaries. While at home between missionary assignments, he acquired property, built homes for his family, and prepared economically for the livelihood, while anticipating his next missionary assignment. His journals of this period open to the reader's mind descriptions of Mormon institutional beginnings. Well, I left out a page. John Dealey wrote about these experiences in that period, and he became involved heavily under Joseph Smith in temple work and in the building of Nauvoo generally, and they remained in that area for the next few years. These early experiences that John Dealey went through seem to be spiritual strops or that defined his character, provoking him to his best efforts and preparing him for the rigorous future which lay ahead as a pioneer leader and builder in the settlement of the West. The records that he kept were 6 journals of his missionary experience from 1839 to 1844. They tell of his life at home after that and the work in the temple that he did. Brigham Young called John Dealey to a number of important positions, and one of the most important was to work in the temple and prepare it to be used before they set out for the West. He spent many days in there. It gives us a picture of John Dealey at home in these diaries, how he interacted with his friends and neighbors and how they interacted with him and the things that he accomplished during that period. Then there's a record of the Nauvoo Exodus going across the plains, and it's reputed that his diaries are some of the best diaries telling of that period. At that time, he was the Brigham Young's clerk. He was at his side constantly going across the plains, and he wrote about that. He told about everything that was going on during that period. The next volume was the Santa Fe mission that he was sent on to follow the battalion to Santa Fe, pick up the money and bring it back. And then the winter and summer quarters activity. diaries will compile about 550 pages, and they have information that probably none of us have read or known before, and they tell these institutional beginnings in the church, and it's a wonderful record that he kept. I hope to have these published in the next few months, and we'll keep you all informed as to the timing and ways that you may obtain the copies of them. I'm grateful for our ancestor John D. Lee. He was a great man, an unusual person. He was either liked tremendously or disliked tremendously, and he lived with that kind of personality. As far as the critique of the book that the three authors have written, they've done a wonderful job. There's a lot of detail in there that we've never known before. But the problem I have with it is how they package the information. And sometimes it's obvious that it's pretty one-sided. I'd like to tell you that I love the John D. Lee family and the things that I'm able to do for ourselves in this matter. I have a testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ and that I cherish and maintain, I hope, throughout my few the years left. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I threatened to get up and talk so long and say so many nice things about Vern that he'd be so embarrassed he wouldn't be able to get his talk, so they let him go first this morning. Passed out a little quiz earlier, and the answers are over here on the sacrament table. About as many copies of answers as there are questions. I got on this program the same way I got on the peer review committee. That is, my brothers and sisters weren't available. My sister's the genealogist. She prepared the questions and answers, and I don't have that much to say about it. And I got to, when Vern was asked to review the manuscript and comment on it, none of my other brothers and sisters were available to take my mother out to California, so that's how I got there. And I'm speaking today because Renee isn't here. Probably the most important and interesting item of information contained in those answers is new genealogical research through DNA. And I'll explain to you everything I know about DNA from reading the Quarter Horse Journal. But I understand that there's mitochondrial DNA that can only be passed from mother to daughter, and that DNA on the Y chromosome is only passed from father to son. So through DNA testing, you can go the bottom line on your pedigree chart or the top line on the pedigree chart, and you're really kind of lost in between. And so I think it was Vern and Leroy submitted their DNA, and it doesn't match up with Lee's of Virginia, and just recently they found out that it matches up with Lemoyne, Mr. Lemoyne from Quebec. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. I'll look that up on the internet. And so Lemoyne's from Quebec. Who knows? There are also Lemoynes in Kaskaskia. We'll find out, but we'll be happy to claim them if it's the ones we want. One guy got prosperous in the fur trade, and all of his sons became sirs and this and that. And one of them, Lemoyne, was the founder of New Orleans, the governor of French provinces out there. I understand Lemoyne means the lesser, and it also means monk. So that's going to be fun to find out who our ancestors were. I always, whenever when people say two things, you try to believe both of them until you can't anymore, and that way you don't close your mind to the facts. That was my method as a criminal defense attorney, is I would read the police report, that's the historian, he writes the story, and I go listen to the other side and I get a different story, and I say, how can I reconcile these two things? If one says the light was green and one says the light was red, instead of saying one of them's a liar, I say they looked at the light at different times. And eventually, sometimes that won't hold through, but that's what you start, is you believe everything until you have a reason not to, and that way you don't miss important stuff. And I think and I presented that theory to Mr. Turley, and he said what we have found to be the case is people generally told the truth about others' participation in the massacre and minimized their own involvement. They lied about their own, but they told the truth about others. And unfortunately, John D. Lee was identified early on as somebody that you could talk about, so there's a lot of information about him. And I think that the way to find out what is, I go with this, that I wasn't there, John D. Lee was, and if you discount what he says too heavily, you're liable to miss a lot of the truth. So John D. Lee is as good a source as there is as to what happened at the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And then you have to discount that by the fact that he had a personal interest in how he was perceived. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Let's see. Now, our special number this morning, family reunions, you like to hear the stories about what really happened, and there's the official version, and then here's the inside skinny on it. At the sesquicentennial of the Mountain Meadows Massacre, Brother and Sister Brown were asked to sing. And that happened because Leslie Moon confused me with one of my nephews, and I says, I can't sing, but I'll get somebody. And so I called Jess Richardson, and he says, no, I can't sing, but I'll get them. While we were there, I understand that they have three organizations that include descendants from the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And there was some jockeying and positioning and some fluidity in the program at the last minute. And one of the things that I heard there, somebody said, was I heard that they're not going to allow any Mormon hymns to be sung. And I didn't know anything about that. But I noticed that Elder Eyring was there, and he had to come to replace Elder Jensen, who was ill. And so down he came, and he was walking around with a bunch of people in suits. And then the suit people disappeared, and he was standing out there right where the walkway comes up and just greeting anybody who wanted to talk to him. And just by himself, just out there bare naked among the wolves. And I thought, well, as long as nobody else is talking to him, I'm going to talk to him. So I had a brief conversation with him. And so he was just right there available to anybody. And when it came time for the Browns to sing, the electricity, something went wrong with the organ. It wouldn't play, it would start, it would stop, and we were kind of wondering, is somebody back there messing with the wires on that, or what's going on? So anyway, all's well that, and while we were there, Vern and Ron Loving met up again. Ron Loving is actually the person from the other side that really started the impetus for reconciliation between immigrants and Mormons. And as I understand it, some of the board disagreed with him. He was kicked off the board of the Mountain Meadows Association, and Vern was the guy who was nominated to give him the message. And so Vern was sitting back there and he says, well, there comes old Ron Loving. I wonder if he'll speak to me. He said, might as well go find out. So they went up there and they had a nice conversation, and then old Ron Loving stuck his hand out, and Vern didn't see it. So they're, oh man, here's this guy with his hand out there, and Vern. Anyway, finally Vern saw it, shook his hand, and went like that, and Vern invited him up to share the microphone with him in the program there. So we all went home, and Elder Eyring left from the Mountain Meadows Sesquicentennial commemoration to go down to dedicate the bell tower at Eastern Arizona College, where his grandfather had attended. And our state president, who's my neighbor across the street, spent several days with him, and then we had state conference a week after that, and so he was telling everybody about his time with Elder Eyring. And he said that Elder Eyring was asked to come down and speak to at the Sesquicentennial of the Mountain Meadows Massacre because Elder Jensen was ill, and they told him, and by the way, at the meeting that you speak at, there will be a riot. We have that information through law enforcement intelligence that there's a riot planned for that meeting, so be advised of that. And so Elder Eyring, not being foolish, was concerned about that and made it a matter of prayer and said that he received the message, I will take care of it. So I don't know how the Lord took care of it, but it was striking to me how available Elder Eyring was to anybody and everybody there, and open to the public and approachable. And as I heard that after, I says, what an act of faith on his part. To be right there where anybody could talk to him. So maybe that's what stopped the riot. Maybe a little handshake back in the back of the crowd stopped the riot. Or maybe the fact that the Mormon hymns couldn't be sung. Maybe that was when they were all supposed to rise up and charge the podium. It was when, no, none of that. But who knows? But it was an interesting story, and we can use our imagination and make a wonderful faith-promoting tale. You got 3 different ways to go with it.
They brought in all that food too, that they fed them all, and I don't think that was planned. And that was a good PR. Feed them.
So, now, here's something that I think is good advice. It's good advice from Bill Cosby. You're aware that this Mr. Gates, the Harvard professor, the black Harvard professor, returned from a trip to China, had trouble getting in his front door. So the neighbor lady called and says, there's 2 men trying to break into the house across the street from me. He goes in the back door and he's on the phone talking to maintenance about the door. And the cop comes there and finds a black man in this house. And even after he was able to identify him by his ID as the resident of the house, he still ended up arresting this black man for disorderly conduct. And so that's kind of a hot thing. I understand that both of those guys got together with Obama for a beer to see if they could work this out. But anyway, they asked Bill Cosby, he says, can you make any comments on that? And he says, yes, but I don't think you want to hear it. He She says, I would like to hear it actually. Bill Cosby says, okay, I wasn't there. And so I think that's a good thing for us to say, you know, if we consider ourselves experts on the Mountain Meadows Massacre, I wasn't there. And she said, what do you think might help the situation? And he said, the truth that both parties will tell the public. They owe it to us because of the sensitivity and the negativeness of it. That if both people came forward and told the truth, whatever it is, then we would be a grown-up community, and that would lead to a grown-up nation. And journalists are just fanning the controversy. If the two people came together and said, okay, forget our emotions, this is what happened, and it doesn't make any difference. If I was wrong, I'm going to say I was wrong. And that's the way people become friends too. And I would recommend that course of action. There's some wisdom there. If we're concerned about the Mountain Meadows Massacre and it's part of our family history, say I wasn't there. And we need to be willing to set aside the fact that we may be descended from John D. Lee and accept the fact that things may not, that the myths that we have cherished may not all be entirely accurate, and the myths that other people have cherished may not be entirely accurate. But at least if our devotion is to the truth rather than to our cause, and if we make the truth our cause, we'll be on the right track. And actually, when I went over to talk to Elder Irene, this is what I talked to him about. I says, my concern is the importance of the Mountain Meadows Massacre today is that something like this could happen again in today's world. And he agreed with me on that. And as I see it, we're not technologically isolated from church headquarters, but we may be culturally isolated. And there are lots of new leaders in the church around the world. Some bishop in Africa is not going to just pick up the phone and call Salt Lake if he's concerned. And so the real importance today and for the future is, I believe, and where John D. Lee may again save the church, is giving people cause to think, what is the duty of a Latter-day Saint who believes sincerely that his local leaders are just wrong? And, you know, it takes a prophet to answer that question. You know, do we say, John D. Lee is the example. He did what he was told, and he's right there. You got the apostles, and then a special chair for John D. Lee right up there on the right hand of God. Or, well, John D. Lee should have known better than that. When you know that something's wrong, you don't do it, and that's why he's in hell. And we don't know what his status is, and it would be nice to know, because then we would know what inferences to draw from that. And the problem is, Elder Scott came down to our state conference and he said, it's true that there are rules and there are exceptions to the rules, but you're not going to hear from the general authorities about the exceptions to the rules. It's not our job to teach the exceptions. We are general authorities, not specific authorities. And so we are going to teach you what the rules are, not what the exceptions are. And the rule is that you should support your local leaders whether or not you agree with them or completely understand why they're doing it. And when your local leader is wrong, it is exceptional. But what should be done in that circumstances? And I think that that is a service that can be provided, and perhaps the most important thing about the Mountain Meadows Massacre today. About the book. Nobody was available to drive my mother, so I went and read it. And I don't want to let pass what Mr. Alder said yesterday. He says, now you understand that this book is really not too favorable towards John D. Lee. And the reason why that is that they now have more information available than Juanita Brooks had available. And I just don't go with that. I think that it's more critical of John D. Lee simply because of the bias and prejudice of one or more of the authors. Because there are plenty of facts in there. If you read through that book for the facts, you see that John D. Lee was not the main mover of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And so when we talk about this, I think that the information I'm going to share should be used for your brains and not as ammunition, because we certainly want to be in a position to have the goodwill of the authors to be able to read the next book that's coming out before it comes out. It was very beneficial, I believe, to the Lee family, to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and to the authors to let Vern read that book. There was a major rewrite of the book at the suggestion that the Lee family made. And how the book started out was with the execution of John D. Lee. And Vern and I made the point. He says, you're selling a book about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and you open up the front page and it says, John D. Lee was executed for the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And this is his life story. And they go, well, okay, all I need to understand about the Mountain Meadows Massacre is the character of John D. Lee. And we pointed that out, and they saw that, and Mr. Turley says, I will see that gets changed. And when it came out, he said to me, I said we'd change it, and we did, didn't we? So, and there's stuff in that book that wasn't in the manuscript, so we didn't get to object to some of the things that we now find objectionable to. And the way the Lee family has benefited, we got to see this before the other scholars got to them and had told them, I had toned this down and maybe you better change some things. So we actually have, I think, a little bit better insight into the mindset of the authors. And so what we have here is a book that has a lot more detailed information. For me, it made the Mountain Meadows Massacre much more understandable. But if you're wanting to read a book about John D. Lee, to understand who John D. Lee is, what his role in the massacre was, I might recommend something like Mormonism Unveiled for a more accurate picture, just because of the bias and prejudice there. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of that, or 2 examples. One of those is this book reports, as a fact, John D. Lee killed, I can't remember if it's 4 or 5 or 6 people. Now, who did what? Well, we know John D. Lee killed this many people. And our family myth has been that John D. Lee may be one of the few people there that didn't kill anybody. In the manuscript, it said that on the day that he was executed, John D. Lee was in the carriage with the Reverend and talking with him, and the Reverend went out and told people, John D. Lee has confessed to me that he killed these 4 or 5 or 6 people. So the reporters are there, they come up to John D. Lee and says, oh, John D. Lee, so is it true that you killed 4 or 5 or 6 people? He says, no, I didn't kill anybody. Okay, so that's the facts that they had available to them, and the fact that came out in the book is simply John D. Lee killed this number of people. So there's several numbers available. One of them is 0. I didn't kill anybody. Number 2 is 4, 5, or 6. I and these 2 other people were assigned the responsibility for killing the wounded in the wagon, and they were killed. We did our job, and the other number is 120 people. I persuaded them all to come out, and they were killed. So you can say accurately, John D. Lee didn't kill anybody, John D. Lee killed 4 or 5, or John D. Lee killed 120 people. And I guess they chose the middle road by saying that he did 4, 5, or 6, but 0 may be just as accurate a number. So this book, I says, while it reports things about John D. Lee that may in fact be true, it reports as facts things about John D. Lee that are not necessarily so. And in this book, John D. Lee doesn't ever get the benefit of the doubt. You're going to have to, and my impression was, as I read through the manuscript, okay, well, that's an interesting conclusion. Let me see what they drew it from. And I read the notes, and I say, I'd like to see the source material that they got that from. It did not have credibility to me. When I got the book, it was so much better than the manuscript that I was so relieved that I thought this is a great book. And so I read back, I'm not as happy with it as I was. Another thing that, and I hesitate on this because I haven't done my homework to nail it down perfectly, so I may end up looking like the fool. But one of the statements in the book is, technically, John D. Lee, as the commander of the 3rd or 4th unit, was subordinate to Haight, who was the commander of the unit above him. He says, but this massacre took place in Washington County, and Washington County was the area that John D. Lee commanded, so John D. Lee really had the military authority, in one sense, on the ground. In law school, my professor told me, he says, every prosecutor should have venue printed on the palm of his hand, because you have to prove the identity of the person that did it, the elements of the crime, and that it happened in the venue that this court has jurisdiction over. And so if you go to the Mountain Meadows Association website, you can read transcripts of the testimony. And the prosecutor said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, or Mr. Witness, where did this crime take place? And witness after witness, including Jacob Hamlin, who was assigned to live there, said, it's in Washington County now, it was in Iron County at the time. And so, to me, that is an indication of a blind spot that the authors had there, that they can't read the trial testimony and see where it happened, but would rather say that John D. Lee is responsible for it because it was within his jurisdiction, when according to the testimony at the trial, it would not have been. And another thing about it is, I think that the authors of the book are making the same mistake that the authors of the massacre made. And that is, they are disrespecting the role of the Native Americans in this. Haight and Lee and Higbee had, in my view, this arrogant thought that they could go out and tell the Indians, attack these people. Wait, no, don't attack them. Oh yeah, go ahead and attack them. Well, no, don't. And John D. Lee's defense is saying, I was under duress here. I was out there by myself with a bunch of Indians. They were going to kill me. And you have right there in the book, the Indians forcing 2 other white men to run in the line of fire to test to see if they could be killed. And yet they're saying, oh, John D. Lee is claiming that the Indians were threatening him. And the statement that the Indians wouldn't have done this if they hadn't been incited. Yet within the book, they're talking about another crisis happening just down the road at Beaver, where the Indian leader Ammon came back and stopped another Indian attack on the wagon train. That's another thing that just doesn't fit with the way that I understand the world to be. And a lesson to be learned from all that is, if you go out to the Mountain Meadows Monument, you see a plaque there that says, this monument is built and maintained by the LDS Church out of respect for the people who died here. And if there's a lesson to be learned from the Mountain Meadows Massacre, it is to be respectful of other people. That there's some arrogance involved when you say, I have the right to live, and you have to give your life for me to live. We're not going to let you get through to California and raise an army to come against us. We're going to kill you right here, and guess what? We're the ones that are making the decision. And so I think that is the lesson we've learned. You know, if it's dealing with the book, the authors of the book, we should respect them for the great work that they've done, the amount of information that they've made available to us, and not be in a position where we get so full of ourselves that we think that we're the ones that get to say how it goes. And I've run out of stuff to say.
Richardson, can I make a comment?
Yeah, does anybody want to?
I already said that I spoke to Mr. Turley 2 weeks ago, and he told me that John Lee had killed 9 people, and I said, where do you get that information? He said, the Dunlap girl said she remembered seeing him on the field. Now, I don't hardly believe it. I told him I didn't believe it.
And I have heard. I heard Mr. Turley make a presentation to the J. Reuben Clark Law Society, the chapter that's in Phoenix. So that's the lawyers. Mr. Turley seemed quite sympathetic to Mr. Lee about his relationship with his attorney. Read some stuff there for the entertainment of the lawyers. Too bad we couldn't get win your appeal, but that's the way it goes. Please send the rest of the money as quick as you can.
There was one more thing he said to me, however, I'd like you to know, but he said the Lee family have been unjustly vilified all over these many years because of this situation. I was happy to hear him say that.
She said that Richard Turley said 2 things. The first one was that John D. Lee killed 9 people, and she says, what's your basis for that? He says, well, the Dunlap girl said that he was on the field. And the other thing that he said to her was that the Lee family has been unjustly vilified over this through the years. One of the things that he said down there was, he said, and this is with no disrespect to the Lee family, but he says John D. Lee just plain lied about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And sometime I'll ask him, you cannot say that John D. Lee never lied, otherwise those people wouldn't have come out and laid down their arms. But my view is John D. Lee was there. He knows more about it than anybody that wrote a book on it. And he wrote it down, and we have to be able to view that critically. but if you want to know what happened, ask somebody who was there.
Do you have a minute or microphone? Oh, unless you want to go up there. Mine is, well, okay, probably a lot of people don't know me, but I come from Lafayette. And anyways, my husband, Don Kerber, he was really into John D. Lee before I even met him. And he's the one that's like, you're named after John D. Lee, because my name is John Duh Lee. And so, anyways, he has a good point on John D. Lee about an amnesty that was set forth. I don't know if everybody, but when I married him, I learned more about John D. Lee than I knew my whole life. So anyways, I'll turn the time over to him.
I wasn't really prepared to talk today, but anyway, I like church history, and I read a lot of church history. And when I met my wife, that she had a pioneer family and a descendant of John D. Lee, I told her all about John D. Lee, and he wasn't the area I focused on. It was church history. But the Mountain Meadows Massacre happened during the Utah War. President James Buchanan sent federal troops to Utah in 1857 and to put down a so-called Mormon rebellion. President Brigham Young called Daniel H. Wells to be the Lieutenant General for the Utah State Militia. They called up 1,000 troops, state militia troops, to stop the federal troops from coming into Utah. And anyway, this pioneer group, Captain Fletcher and Fencher and Lieutenant Baker, they came with this group from Sherwood County, Arkansas, to Salt Lake City. And it was during this time President Young said we might have to leave our homes here in Utah and flee to another place. And so he asked the saints not to sell provisions to the immigrants passing through. And this caused a lot of friction with the immigrants, including this group that we're talking about. And they were stranded in Salt Lake City. They couldn't move on to California because of the lack of provisions. And so they kind of were sitting in limbo just for a little while. And some of the group broke away. It was 150 wagons to begin with. And 50 of the wagons went across the Sierra Nevadas, across Donner's Pass. And the other 100 wagons, they remained in Salt Lake City just for a little while. And anyway, they eventually had other people to join up with them, and they headed south. And they gained another 20 wagons, so it's about 120 wagons they headed south with. And when they got to the Provo area, they had friction with the Mormons because of grazing cattle on open land and stuff. And this group thought the land belonged to the public, and the Mormons thought it belonged to them. And the same thing happened when they got to Nephi. And they picked up a group in Provo. And they picked up these other 20 wagons. And these were people that were very discontented to live among the Mormons. They didn't like the Mormons. And they picked up this one wagon in Provo. And it was really a bad element. It was like one bad apple. And they joined up with this wagon train heading south. And we know the story, what happened about poisoning, wells and stuff, and killing some of the Indians. And there was a judge down in Fillmore. His name was Robinson, and his wife was poisoned from the poison that this was used in this pond or well. And anyway, some of the Indians, got involved, and they died from the poisoned water. And this got the Indians on the warpath. And And when they got to Cedar City, they wanted to buy supplies, and they wouldn't sell them supplies. This is what Brigham Young had told them to do, not to sell any supplies to the immigrants. And they went into the local store there, and one of the guys with Captain Venture, he had his gun on his side. He says, "This is the gun that killed old Joe Smith." And Captain Venture says, "No, don't say that." You know, they were getting mad. And anyway, but what happened was they told the local store owner in Cedar City, he says, "We're going to contact Major General Johnston and tell him another route, show him another route into Utah," because this was during the Utah War. And anyway, and so in my opinion, you know, they got involved with the Utah War at this time, and you know, I'm not going to go into a lot of details about that, but anyway, Brigham Young stopped the federal government for coming into Utah. He burned wagons and stopped the federal government, and he could have been put in prison. He was the leader of the church and so forth, and he could have been put in prison for this. And so, same with the church leaders. But President Buchanan, James Buchanan, realized he made a mistake, and he wanted to settle this in the easiest, quickest way possible. And so what he did, he called some ex-governors to come to Utah. And these governors came to Utah, and he left it up to them to be the sole judge of what happened and, you know, the outcome. And they decided, after looking at the whole situation, to give amnesty to everybody in the Utah War. This included Brigham Young, all the church leaders, all the militia leaders, captains, majors, everyone, including the soldiers right down to the least. And I don't see why, and I don't know all the history, but to me that should have included John D. Lee at this time because of this involvement in Cedar City. And this inflamed the Mormons in Cedar City to be angry with this pioneer group because they were inciting the Mormons about bringing General Johnston's army into Utah. And so, anyway, so this was, they should have fell under, including John D. Lee, under this blanket amnesty. And, you know, I know it was 20 years later to the day that they took this action against John D. Lee for punishment. There's a lot of history that leads up to this, but I would be here all day if I told you about that. So, but anyway, my wife wanted me to mention this, so thank you.
That's one of the contributions of this book that's interesting is a theory about the disease that went around there and details that weren't available to other students. It's very interesting, so you'll have to read the book to learn about that. I think the time's being charged to me, so I'm going to turn it over back to them and let them do with the microphone what they want.
Thanks, Jared, and for the information that you, and thanks, Vern, also for your great talk. We appreciate it. One thing I failed to mention too is that Ida Mae Richardson is the person that accompanied the Browns in their musical number, and we'll do that again as they sing to us at the end. So we appreciate them. Appreciate everyone that's spoken today. And I want to just turn the remaining time over to Dr. Richardson, our president, to give our concluding address in this session today. And we really want to thank everyone for being here. This has been a great reunion the last couple of days, and we hope that these reunions keep on going and bring us together this way in the future. And we're trying to find ways to notify people better of these reunions so that everyone that wants to be here can be here. And hopefully this database that Dr. Richardson and Scott, I can't remember. Mark, yeah, sorry Mark, I couldn't remember, but have done will really help us. And so hopefully we'll be able to continue these in the future. But I appreciate Dr. Richardson so much. We owe him a great debt for the work that he's done as our president, and I'll turn the time to him now.
we come near to the conclusion of the reunion of 2009, in remembering events and times and results of the happenings of a member of our family many years ago. I emphasize, many years ago. It has been wisely said that none of us were there. We are indebted to Jared for preparing both information and his thoughts. We're indebted to those who came and addressed us, including ex-president, previous president of Dixie College, Philip Alder. We're indebted to each one of you who listened carefully. Because from what has been presented, you make the decision about how you feel about it. And it is from our feelings that we form our future actions about it. And how do I say that we form our actions about something that happened many years ago? We always do that. Example, you read the events that happened at the time of the sacrifice of our Savior Jesus Christ, his bodily giving of his life. And what we feel about that brings us to what we do about it. And if there's anything that's important is to remember what the Savior said about the relationship between how we feel and what we do. If you love me, keep my commandments. I don't know of any statement that is of more illustrative strength than that simple statement. If you love me, keep my commandments. If you have a feeling about something, make sure that that feeling is based as well as possible on two things, the facts and the way they felt about that at the time. And not one of us here can define how John D. Lee was feeling at any one particular time. We're going to guess that. And it's a guess that becomes a little thin. And if we want to place our feelings about what we think about another person's feelings, good luck, Charlie. So what I'm saying is that after all of this, which has been good and wonderful, it comes down to this simple thing. What do you choose to do in your life that is a reflection of the good that you see in another person, including the one who gave DNA? Of course, DNA comes from many sources nowadays. That you decide that you honor and respect because that's how you'll do. And what you do becomes who you are and what you have become. And that, my fine family, is how you prepare to live in the future. I'm talking about the long future. And that long future is as real as today's presence. It's as real. It only hasn't been lived yet, but it's as real. And I see that as important. Probably more important to me than anything else that's been said. But what has been said has been very important to me. Because, well, I've already said. We thank those who have taken part. And my remarks are going to be brief. I need to say, as we leave today, we're going to ask the previous judge to record something on film that may end up on the website. I hope it does. And if so, we depend upon him to record your faces. So smile, would you? There is some evidence that I turn to Judge Lee or Judge Owens and say, Isn't that the definition of any hearing or any decision that is to be made? There is some evidence that, and then continue on as you said. And the judge, and you'll have to correct me on this, is the one to say what evidence is to be admitted in the court. Is that not true? Okay. If that's true, then we don't have a judge saying to us how we're going to use any evidence. That's up to you. I'm glad we have good judges. And I would like to just say how much I personally have felt about the service that Judge Wallace Lee has given and will continue to give, and the service that Renee Durfee has given and will continue to give. And we thank the presentation by Jared about that. Now, some brief remarks. We remember and are remembering times and events which recall the best of John D. Lee and his families. The best. He was concerned for the welfare of his wives and children. We are his children. Those who have married into the Lee family have added to and have not subtracted from that which we have received from our ancestors. We welcome you because you are part of us. And what we have received, what have we received, each one of us here? That depends to some extent upon what we know of the events and years of his toils, John D. Lee, upon the same earth upon which we live and work. We are living in the times of John D. Lee because we are remembering. He recorded his work and feelings. Haven't we learned that? He recorded them. He left us much. He wanted us to know him, I believe. He wants us to know him. And we can do that to some real degree. If asked if he continues to this day his concern for us, what would you say? Do you think his concern for us continues? Or did he leave and say, nuts to you? Which one? Clear. There is something in our hearts that says he loves us and continues to love us. And because of that, we continue to love him and respect him. Surely you have thought with real intent, know how he is and where he is. There's every one of us. What's going on the other side? There is much we cannot know as yet, but each of us will be in a blessed place where associations once had upon this earth can be remembered and reconciled. Remembered and reconciled in the future. And we might want to learn to do that now. I refer now to President Hinckley's remarks, but I'll speak briefly about those. If you have noticed in your invitation to attend today, to remember and be reconciled by the best of John D. Lee and his wives, we plan to say less of the events in the meadow near here. We have said much about that. Our original intent was to say a little less about that and a little more about those things that John D. Lee contributed. But we have done that quite well, I say. Others have plowed that ground beyond what is known. I defend that statement. It is a repeat of what Jared just said 10 minutes ago. Others have plowed that ground beyond what is known. We don't know some of what happened, which would be critical in the final analysis. But maybe we don't need to know everything about everything of the Civil War, or even what happened on the day that Christ gave his life. We may not need to know everything. On a September day in 1999, a man believed by some and many of us here, that was on September 1999, with simply believable counsel. What he said to me, and I believe to you, was very important. His name was Gordon B. Hinckley. He addressed several there at the dedication of the present monument at the Meadows. That was in September 1999. The group was diverse. Jared said something about a diverse group, or groups, some of which planned a major event called a protest. Some from Arkansas, that was in the group to which the President Hinckley spoke, some from Arkansas, some descendants of the previous Iron County militia. Oh, I could say more about that from what Jared said. One or two of the Paiute were reported there, to be there. It was diverse. Yet President Hinckley spoke very simply. And many of you were there. I could ask you to raise your hands, and you were there. Recall he ventured that we do not know what occurred there, speaking of this time and this people. That is, the people who were there were not there. There at the dedication, heard him say, we're not there 100 and some odd years ago. He further counseled that we leave final judgment to God. And I could stop right there. For out of that can come sufficient inspiration that the spirit of confirmation and reconciliation can be such that our love continues both for our ancestor and for the Father and the Son themselves, which becomes the most important commandment, as you know. To us, therefore, we can recall with clear memory the, quote, best of times and events which lead us to love, yes, love those whose faith, industry, and love for us, their children, leave now the best of our ancestors. And I'm talking about John D. Lee. We anticipate remembering one particular night. Now, I can change this because it's coming to the end. We can remember what was brought to us by Wally Lee, Judge Lee. Were you listening? I was. We all listened. Can you know what his feelings were that night when he was given an opportunity to save his life and make a lot of money? Money that he needed to take care of his many wives and children. And he'd been sitting in that incarcerated place. And I can't say anything more bad about that than you can. Can you feel those? I think I can. I've never been there, I wasn't there, but I think I can feel those feelings. And I think that you can. Well, we shall remember, as Judge Lee was able to return with us to that event, that more than most defines John D. Lee. That night, more than most defines John D. Lee, in my humble estimation. As we remember one ancestor, our need is to know whose wives and children, read this bit. As we remember one ancestor, our need is to know those wives and families who depend upon the family provider. That was John D. Lee. They depend upon him. I'm going to skip down some. The concern for these families to be left with less or little became John Lee's great oppression. He surely remembered so much. Agatha Ann, a little baby huddled under insufficient cover, tending a small fire as John returned after a mob had pillaged and burned their homes. Home. This is recorded very well. Emma's trying and succeeding to operate the ferry boat at the river crossing in the absence of the husband for good reason, including foodstuffs. He'd go for foodstuffs. In fact, she ran the ferry. Had that baby all by herself. Rachel determined to leave the pools going south to locate a sick husband after a certain message from a bird. A message from a bird, you know the story. Rachel was at the pools. John D. Lee was in northern Arizona. Very sick. They didn't have email in those days. What was that story? Do you remember it? That bird came and sat on the windowsill this episode is to fly in the face of reality. If you said a little bird gave you a message that said, well, you belong someplace else besides the real living world. Yet happen it did. At a certain day and time of day, and the message became clear to one who understood the workings of the Spirit of the Lord, and that was Rachel. That episode needs no embellishment to be truly amazing. The message is one thing, but what horse could be given rein to find a husband seriously ill and alone in northern Arizona? What horse do you have that's that smart? Very unusual. I have stood by Rachel's grave, within a very few miles of the farmhouse where Effie Mae Lee Richardson stirred graham biscuits, then in a wood, and then put in an oven of a wood stove. I remember that stove. With patience hovering over, the mother retrieved them, pulling the biscuits out, opening what appeared to be ample jaws. This large graham biscuit opened up, looked like jaws, and put in some butter and honey. She invented honey butter. The honey butter was not invented in a restaurant. My mother invented it. Then I'd take those best biscuits out to milk the cows, and I'd set the biscuit on my knee. And I'd milk the cows. And just biscuits were just a tiny bit dry, and I needed some milk. Ever milked a cow? Ever put a biscuit on your knee? I'll let you fill that one in. I hope Rachel has had some little thing to do with my and our strength of will and purpose to choose right over wrong. After all that we can remember, say, or do here, shall we ever forget we are children of our Heavenly Father? Given opportunity as spirit offspring to come here today, to live within these bodies, can counsel to avoid becoming too full of ourselves, quoting Taryn, to avoid becoming too full of ourselves, to retain that touch of humility that is so valuable. We can, if we choose, to see in these pioneer ancestors, including one John Lee, the best of ourselves, prepared to be in a place and time where we can say with simple acknowledgement, we have loved thee. Yeah. We have loved thee, John D. Lee, and your families, which is us. I'm coming to the conclusion of my remarks. Quoting one Dunn, I think his name was John Dunn, when he said, "Seek not, therefore sin not to know for whom the bell tolls. Today, it tolls for thee." John Lee, thee. I believe what I've said is true. I believe what I've said is adequate, that we can bring this to an end. I believe what we have all said will have influence upon us in our devotion to do the thing that is right and true, because we have ancestors that lived the right and the true. Not perfectly, never perfectly. So with that, at 11 o'clock, it's a good time to call the end of this reunion. I sometimes wish, along with Judge Lee and others, that we had all the descendants of John D. Lee in one place. The stadium may not be able to hold them, but we have representatives, and to what extent you can represent them by what you believe on the basis of there is some evidence that, and on that basis you can be his continued representative on the earth as a family. And as we say and believe that we love Jesus Christ, it becomes more important, and therefore more important eternally than anything we've said here today. want to sit right here and come and sing. Have been so good. It has been so sweet. So I can off.
We'll just put it down. We're going to sing hymn 136, and we'd love if you would all join us on the last verse, the fourth verse.
Number 136.
Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this opportunity that we've had to be in attendance at this reunion. We're grateful for those that have spent the time and the effort on our behalves to make it a wonderful and a glorious experience for us. We pray for those that will be traveling this day, that they'll be able to do so in peace and safety. And until we meet again, we say these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Son. Are we on the air?
You're on the air.
Jared, you, I understand, were public defender in Mojave County, and there was an incident that happened during your practice there as public defender involving my cousin Ted Shumway, who was prosecutor, part of the prosecutor's office for Mojave County, in addition to being the city attorney of St. George. And he, several years ago, got pulmonary fibrosis and intended to write all of his memoirs, but never got beyond about the first grade before he died. And I'm wondering, if it was a great story you told. I'm wondering if you could go over that again.
Sure, and I actually have a few more about him. The county seat of Mojave County is in Kingman, Arizona, and Mojave County includes land north of the Colorado River. So in order for us to get to the Moccasin Justice Court, we had to drive through Las Vegas and St. George and back into Arizona. So it was a 6-hour trip from the office. And so the county attorney had Ted Shumway as his special prosecutor for the Moccasin Justice Court, which included all of the Arizona Strip. And I understand Ted told me also that he was the lawyer for the city of Enoch.
That's true.
And he enjoyed being the one lawyer for the city of Enoch. So I met Ted at the Moccasin Justice Court, and we visited, and I learned that he had been a missionary companion in Uruguay to my grandmother's cousin, Galen Bigler, who was on the High Council down in Kingman, Arizona. And I can't remember in which order these cases went, but I did have a DUI trial, and my client was guilty, but I figured if during the course of the field sobriety test, when they ask you to stand on one leg and count to 30 and touch your nose with your fingers and things like that, the highway patrol officer, Arizona Department of Public Safety Officer McCabe, who was a Navajo man and member of the church, he had slipped and he had fallen down while administering these tests. I'm not going to miss the chance to ask this guy, was he waving from side to side about 6 inches or less or more, and didn't you fall down while you were asking this? So we went there to the courthouse, and Judge Heaton had a jury in from mostly Colorado City, and there was an attorney Welker from St. George who was admitted to practice in Arizona, and we tried 2 cases in the same day out of the same jury pool. And the juries deliberated and came back about 15 minutes on each of them and gave the right result. Mine was guilty, and Mr. Welker's was found not guilty. And Ted, there was one Indian on the jury there, and Ted moved to strike him as a peremptory strike, and I challenged that on the basis of Batson versus Kentucky, and neither Ted nor McKay Heaton had heard about that one, but Ted gave his reasons for striking him, is that he was unemployed, whereas everybody else wasn't, and that's why I didn't want him on the jury. I can't remember if they left him on the jury or not, but that was the case I tried with him. But the good story is there was a man from somewhere up here in Utah who was hauling hay down to the racetracks in Las Vegas and was going down the Virgin River Gorge to do that. and his hay hauling rig was too big, and he needed to have a commercial license to drive it. And so he had been stopped once or maybe twice at the port of entry there in Arizona and cited. And so he knew how to get around that. He went around Santa Clara Way and came down the old highway, and unfortunately they caught him there. So he had these fines, 3 sets of fines, and Judge Heaton, the Justice of the Peace, was a rancher and an accountant. And so I always attributed my theory was that Judge Heaton's view of the law was what he understood from the IRS, and that is that you pay, and you pay every last dime, or you're sorry that you didn't. And Judge Heaton was kind of a unique person in the legal community. He actually believed that people ought to obey the law and not just get a slap on the wrist. So as I understand it, he had the highest collection rate on his fines of any court in Arizona. And the way he did that was he would impose the maximum fine in every case, which was about $2,500, plus surcharges of maybe 37 or 47%. And then he would suspend all of it except for the appropriate amount of the fine. And if you, then he would say, you talk to my clerks, they will tell you how this works. And the clerks would lecture the people and say, if you have a hard time making this payment and you can't make it, you give us a call. If not, and we will work with you, we promise you we will work with you, but if you don't call us, we can't work with you and we won't. And so he collected those fines very, very efficiently. And so this poor man had had a hard time providing for his family. He'd gone off working at supervising migrant farm workers, was gone from the home for months at a time. His wife was the salt of the earth, and he wanted this man, Judge Heaton wanted this man in his court. And I called up and I says, Judge, he's got to drive several hours to get there. I've got to drive several hours. Can't we just do this over the phone? No. So begrudgingly I came up, and I had a little travel allowance from the county to pay for my hotel and my meals. And we got there and the man was sullen. He had his wife and his son there with him, and they filled out a financial affidavit, and I looked over the financial affidavit and I discussed it with the man and his wife. I says, you can't turn this in. He says, this is under oath. You could be prosecuted for perjury. And the wife said, no, everything on there is true. I said, no, it's not. Well, it says, look right here. It says that your housing expense is 0. And she says, that's true. We've had the home for several years. We've not been able to make the payments on it for the last few months. We're going to lose the house to foreclosure. We're not spending anything on housing. Well, here it says that your food expense is 0. That's not true. She says, yes, it is. We eat from the food bank and what we can grow in the garden. And I said, here it says that you have, your cash on hand is 0. That's not true, because you have several hours trip back. You can't make it back without buying gas, so you have money to buy gas to get back. You need to put that down. She said, we brought the gas with us. And I felt really sorry for her, and I went outside onto the porch of the courthouse there and was looking at that and wondering if it was legal for me to give my travel allowance to her. Because it was county money for a county purpose, and I didn't know if I was allowed to do that. And I would have gone hungry if I'd gone home that way. And Ted came walking out there as I was looking across the fields, and he says, "What's the matter with you? Did you come out here for a smoke or something?" And I just handed him the affidavit and I said, "Look at this," and explained. And it wasn't hard for me to squeeze a tear, but I kind of let one go a little bit, let my voice shake a little bit, and as I was explaining it to him, and Ted looked at that and he said, "Well, now you got me going." And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill and says, "Here, give this to her and tell her it's from me." And I went back in where they were waiting, and I handed her the money and said, "This is from the prosecutor," and she just burst into tears with the tears gushing, and her husband just sat in the corner looking down at the floor. And that was my only case up there that day, and it took us all day with the judge handling one thing and another, and finally we went in to talk to the judge about it. And Ted said, "Judge, this is a case where the man is flat on his back." He says, "I've even given him some of my own money to get home on it." I knew I was in pretty good shape when the prosecutor made that statement. And the judge says, "I think he's lying. I think that he's got money hid out somewhere. I think he can pay it." And I had heard that the judge was a rancher, and I said, "Judge," says, "when a horse is tied up to a post and he's pulling back hard on the rope," says, "that's not the time to go up and try to handle him or touch him or gentle him." Says, "if you do that, that horse is going to hurt himself or he's going to hurt you. You don't know which direction he's going to go or when." Says, "you have to let that horse pull on that rope until he takes a step forward and gives himself a little bit of slack in the rope." Says, "otherwise somebody gets hurt. And you need to just give him a little bit of time and a little bit of slack. Otherwise, we don't know what he's going to do." And I really believe that the man would have gone outlaw. I just said, "No, I'm done with it."
Kate, we've got to stop for just a minute.
The judge converted all of the fines to community work service, and that was a proud moment in my life. And Ted was a good guy to work with, straightforward on it, and not an axe to grind. He was just doing the job.
Thanks a lot, Jared. Appreciate that.
Go for it.
Okay, I guess we start with, in about the 1880s, my aunt came to me and decided that maybe we should do something about the small cemetery down in New Harmony, where the cows were desecrating the graves of Agatha Ann and her children. And so we decided that we'd go down and take a look and see what had to be done in order to put a fence around the place, which we did. We discovered that we'd need about 200 feet of fencing, and we got our stuff all together, all of the cement and everything, wheelbarrows and stuff to mix it in. And we went down with my other aunt and her husband and my two boys, and in preparation, and Aunt Hilma, and in preparation to putting up the fence. We got down there and we decided that we'd have to do a little bit of
Surveying.
Figuring out what we're going to do first, and we decided that we'd have to get square corners. And I remembered in my machinist training that if you have one leg of a triangle that is 3 foot long, the other leg of the triangle, which is 4 foot long, the hypotenuse will be 5 foot long. So, with those dimensions, we decided that we would take and get a corner, one corner square, which is the southwest corner. Then we went from that to all the rest of them. And we decided that we'd start digging post holes, put in the post and cement, and then when I was all finished, we put in the gate. But during the interim of putting in the fence post, my sons stopped and asked me when we were having lunch, Dad, they says, we're not too excited about a 5th generation grave. We're just not interested in that. And I says, well, boys, I says, you got to remember that that woman's blood runs in your veins and that you are responsible to seeing that this is taken care of. And they dug holes like gophers the rest of the day. They really went after it. And hence the fence was put up, and it is still up there today. And so that was the story about putting up the fence.
The family raised $300.
Oh yeah, the family raised $300 to support that. And so my family went down, and her family and everybody, and we put the fence up.
Well, I know I'm appreciative. I really have a reverence and a love for Agatha Ann, and
There's another thing goes along with that. Because of that, we were able to get legal access to the cemetery in perpetuity. So any family member can go there as long as they want to.
oh, see, that's beautiful.
Somebody put up a nice
You do.
rockway now and down in there and everything, and it's pretty simple to get to now if you can get across the creek.
Really?
Yes.
So it's a lot easier. You don't have to go through someone's
You
property
don't have to go up the
anymore.
north end and come down around and through the fences and all that business anymore. You just go right to the bottom of that one field, over about, maybe 35, 40 yards.
Wow.
And then there's a little place in the fence where you can go through, but the cattle can't. And then you can go on right up to the little pathway right to the cemetery.
And you said,
We were just there, not very long ago, just a few months. And we had to get permission. And the guy who,
Mr. Pace.
you have to get permission because you have to go through private property to
That's
get
true.
to it. So,
Yes, that's true. But he did give us the permission to do that, the family, to go in and visit that grave,
yeah.
which was very, very nice of him. It wasn't the Mr. Pace that you talked to, it was his brother that we had dealings with, and he since died. And then his brother, this was a lawyer down in California, took over the property, and he's the one now that takes care of it. I met him on a tractor about 3 months ago, out in the field getting in his hay, and he said, yes, he says it's a lot easier to go down the other way and up, which I didn't know. And so now it's accessible to anybody that wants to go see it. If the gate is locked, then he'll unlock it for you, because he's the last house right there by the river.
and so you said you started the Utah Valley Symphony?
50 years ago, me and my wife started it down at our first rehearsal with Jacob Boz down in the BYU lower campus in the southwest corner in the basement.
So
That was
you
our
played
first
it-
rehearsal.
So you played in it when Dr. Barris was there?
Oh, yes. What a wonderful man. What a wonderful conductor.
And do you remember me being there?
Yes. Now I remember. I remember, and then Diane recognized you. She just went by her a minute ago.
What did you play?
Violin.
Okay, so did
Yeah.
Diane. Carl played the French.
But I played third chair French horn all those years. For 50 years we played in that orchestra. It was our life.
Oh, well, good for you.
So,
I know it's brought a lot of joy to a lot of people. I played in it for, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 years, and then I went with the orchestra at Temple Square
Yeah.
and started playing with them.
Before the Temple Square Orchestra was organized, we were doing the 1812 Overture with cannons in our little orchestra. And I was the one that built all those cannons and fired them. We did it with Utah Symphony too, for 20 years.
Wow. Well, thank you.
You bet, that was our pleasure. I'm Carl Furr, and my 2 sons helped me build the fence along with my aunt and uncle.
And what is your wife's name?
Diane.
Forgot.
And
Diane
your,
Hilgendorf Furr.
and your son's names?
I keep talking about
One of them
orchestra.
was Kenneth, and the other one was Keith.
And they were the ones that helped work on
They were the ones that dug the holes.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.